Welcome back to the Peer Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Van Blaricum. Before we get started, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. My next guest is somebody who I've actually crossed paths with at a very different period of time in my life. We'll get into specifics in a little bit here, but this guy is an incredibly gifted writer, poet. It's just really interesting how the universe works and how people are put in our paths. And, this episode and the way that we reconnected, it really is coming full circle for me. So I really hope you guys enjoy this. And without further ado, here's Alex.
So I'm 30 years old now. I am from Wisconsin, from Appleton, basically grew up there my whole life. I was born in some small town down by Madison, but spent most of my time in Appleton. My childhood was okay, was up and down. Like family wise, my family dynamic was amazing. I was raised with two parents who showed me nothing but unconditional love. Um, I experienced trauma as a young child. I was sexually abused by a babysitter when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And that ended up being probably a catalyst to a lot later on. I mean, at the time, it didn't really seem like much. And as I grew older, I did a really good job of compartmentalizing it to make it so it wasn't really this, in my head at least, this thing that affected my life very much. But after I kind of went through therapy down the line, I realized that whether I wanted to admit it or not, that did have like a huge impact on how I viewed love, how I viewed relationships, how I viewed people in general. Um, but honestly, when it looks like if you know how everyone's like, is there anything like awful about your child? That's the only thing that I can really like turn and look back on and be like, oh yeah, that was a really negative experience that affected me moving forward. But other than that, things were really good. I played sports, soccer. I was really good at soccer. Kind of had just that normal Wisconsin suburb lifestyle, for lack of a better term. I started getting into drugs in middle school, marijuana, alcohol, lots of alcohol. As you know, Wisconsin has a vibrant drinking culture that I
Man, we got
also
a
didn't
problem, don't
realize.
we?
Yeah, we do. We have a huge issue. We have a huge issue, and you don't even really realize it. Like I tell my friends down here now that I'm in Arizona about like some of like the things that I witnessed growing up and just how abundant alcohol was and how like it was just freely given to like kids to like taste and try at like young ages without any real like processing of what we're actually doing here. And so my experiences with drugs and alcohol came early. And looking back on it, I'm assuming with a lot of the mental health stuff that I was dealing with, and that it was just kind of the catalyst for a perfect storm as I entered into high school. At 16, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease and spent a lot of time in the hospital. And that's kind of where the opiate addiction came forth. I'd already been partying. I'd already been, spending most of my weekends drinking and using, recreational drugs here and there. But as after I got out of the hospital after a pretty lengthy stay, I had spent the whole time on a fentanyl drip. I'd spent the whole time with painkillers being pumped into me because, they finally saw that there was actual pain there. It had gone undiagnosed for a few years. And I kind of left the hospital with that being my answer. You know what I mean? In my head, I was like, wow, like I found this thing that turns off my head, number one. And it also makes my stomach feel good because that wasn't feeling too good at the time. And beyond that, it just kind of made me not like care about like, whatever the future outcomes were. I had a lot of doctors telling me different things. I was seeing a lot of different specialists and therapists, and it was all just kind of a lot being thrown at me. And I think that that just kind of became the answer. I realized that opiates was kind of the save all for me back then, and so I kind of took off running after that. I was expelled my junior year from high school, and then expelled from the alternative school after that, and kind of just hit the ground running with my opiate addiction. It spiraled pretty quickly. Um, Went from just being a prescription pill addict that got them from doctors to being kicked out of pain clinics, red flagged for scamming prescription pads and pharmacists, And so that's when heroin came into play. It's kind of the storybook, poster child for like, the switch from being overprescribed opiates as a youth to turning to heroin in my young adulthood. And that kind of puts you into a kind of new lifestyle. I think that when I took that step from, you know, using pills that I was getting from a doctor to, going into different places that I'd never been before in order to get heroin and get, like crack cocaine and get different drugs that I had never really had access to. I think that kind of changed the trajectory that my lifestyle went on. And so that's kind of where things turned into that, for lack of a better term, hard use where I was, homeless and, being really unsafe and putting myself in situations that were going to be harmful to myself or others. I became extremely suicidal, and that kind of all just spiraled into eventually a bunch of legal trouble, which kind of led me to prison. In 2016, I was charged with delivering heroin and recklessly endangering safety for a non-fatal overdose that happened, and I was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And that's where I met. That's where I met you, my friend.
That's where we met. Yeah.
That's where we met. But prison was like a really positive experience for me, for like lack of a better term, I think. I was pretty blessed that, like, including yourself, like I was always pretty much surrounded by pretty positive people that, like, at the end of the day, I knew that they didn't want this to be their long-term lifestyle. I mean, I think that falters and like goes up and downs with the ebbs and flows of prison and that kind of lifestyle you live. But really, from like the second that I got into intake until the time that I was released, I was around people that were interested in like productive conversation and like keeping smiles on faces and not being involved in like the different politics and the different, drug games that are involved in prison just as prevalent as they are in the streets. And I really just found my love for like literature and writing in there. And yeah, that kind of pushed me through. I know we've talked before that like it's hard to even read. It's hard to even read now that I'm released and I'm like doing my everyday thing because I just read so much literature in prison. But yeah,
It's
that's kind of
interesting how
yeah.
you talk about, those like habits or those routines that you kind of get into. Reading is not something that I would probably pick up by choice again, but
Right.
I do enjoy writing, and it's just interesting hearing you because you've well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but you've actually kind of made this into a thing. So
Right,
um
right.
I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that started in prison. Like where I'm at now, like if I look back on it, like it all started there. I remember like my favorite part of the day was getting up in my dorm at Chippewa Falls because everybody kind of slept in. I had one of my dorm mates that let me use their radio, and I would just throw on the radio on my head, and I would just get my notebook out, and I would just like enjoy my cup of coffee while everybody else was sleeping, and I'd have the radio on, and I do the same thing now. Like I get up super early, I put on some music, I get my cup of coffee and like a muffin or something, and I just write, just whatever kind of comes to my brain right away in the morning is kind of, how I start my day. And it always makes my day better. And those are the habits, like those little habits that you can kind of make into bigger habits in places where it's hard to do it because it's easy in prison to like, get involved in all the stuff that you shouldn't get involved in. So I think that, reflecting and kind of honing in on those small positive habits that we made in prison is really important for us as we transition and become a regular productive member of society, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really learned a lot during that period of time, and I thought that I got my head on straight. And I mean, it didn't take me long after I got out because I think in some ways I went back to a really sick environment. So I
Right,
did end up, going back to use. But I would agree to you that that was the longest I had sober or without using
right.
substances for probably since I was a kid, so
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
was just a good break for my brain, I think, to get away from that. And that was the beginning of the end. Like I said, I still picked
Right.
up, after that, but I think in some ways it showed me that it was possible to be productive or survive, maybe is a better word,
Right.
without getting high. I didn't
Right.
necessarily
Exactly.
need that. So,
Yep. I agree.
um,
Adapt. I like to use the word adapt because I feel like drug addicts and alcoholics are very good at adapting. And if we can find ways to do that positive in places like prison, even if it's like small things, it doesn't have to be like, some profound thing, but even if you can just adapt in positive ways, you're practicing to be able to adapt in the real world in positive ways.
so one of the things that was interesting to me too is some of the work that you're doing now. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what got you into that? How you help people today. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So back in 2022, well, I'll step back a little bit as well because you talked a little bit about, like using after you got out. So like I never used any opiates after I got out, but I did go through this period being in Wisconsin, and I've worked my like I call it my moonlight job now, like bartending and like managing restaurants. I was in this culture where like I felt like I could drink like a normal human. And if I look back in it for like the first like year or two when I got out of prison, I tried to do that and I kind of did it successfully. I didn't see any like negative consequences. I didn't have, this trouble stopping or anything. But as the years progressed, I noticed just how much of myself I wasn't. I didn't have like these big overwhelming symptoms like I had when I would use opiates or use, stimulants, but I just slowly over time noticed that like I was losing myself in like what I wanted out of life a little bit more and more. And so I practiced a lot of harm reduction there. I started working on, like how do I how do I get back to the person that I want to be? And that was huge in like stopping drinking. So, I worked with, my bosses at my different jobs and, I talked to my friends and I was like, hey, like I don't really want to drink anymore, but I still want to like live this life that I'm living. Like I still enjoy people's presence. I still enjoy my job. I don't want to uproot everything just because there's this smaller thing that is, kind of making it a little more difficult for me to be positive and productive. And so I was able to, through harm reduction and just, slowing down and not putting myself in different places and, working on my schedule. So I'm not working as many nights and working more days where there's less of like people getting drinks after work. All these things kind of snowballed into this effect where I was like, hey, like, I'm going to quit drinking for good. And I'm going to start, doing more of the stuff that I was doing while I was in prison. And so in 2022, I like quit drinking for good and also quit my job because my job not I was working some construction side job and I was just finding myself really really miserable. And it was the first time in my like recovery that I'd ever felt like that misery. I was just like, man, nothing's really making me happy anymore. I'm kind of just going through the motions. I'm not drinking and like I'm going to therapy and I'm still not really feeling what I thought I was going to feel. Like I thought that like completely cutting out the alcohol and like not working at the job that I thought was, not for me and like going to therapy, I thought this was like the answer and like everything was going to be fine and just the light was going to illuminate for me and everything was going to be back to normal. And it didn't. And so I started reaching out. I was like, hey, I started reaching out to like my dad and like my family and like other people that had helped me in the past. And I was kind of like, hey, like, do you have any like ideas for stuff that I can do to kind of help me feel better? Because I feel like I'm doing everything that I possibly can. I was going to the gym, doing everything, and it just wasn't working. And my dad said something that was pretty profound. I always remember it. He's like, "Well, you don't write anymore." He's like, "You every time we talked when you were in prison, all you did was talk about books, what book you were reading, or like what you were writing, or like what you were doing literature wise." And I kind of realized that like, hey, like this isn't something that I'm intentionally putting into my life. And so I kind of had to reflect on that. And I realized I was scared. Like I realized I was super afraid of like people knowing that I did something that would look feelings wise, you know what I mean? Because I was never good at like sharing my feelings. So I was super afraid that like people were gonna like judge me for sharing my feelings in like a quote unquote soft way and like a toxic masculinity type of world. So I was super afraid of being judged for that. So in the summer of 2022, I just made a random TikTok account and started posting my poetry under a pen name, which was awesome. It was Your Favorite Felon. So that was like my first pen name where I was like kind of hiding in the shadows with my poetry. And unbeknownst to me, not being a very technical TikTok guy, I didn't know that it was connected to my contacts and it was connected to my Facebook. And so all of a sudden, I have my friends all messaging me, and they're like, "Hey, dude, are you posting poetry on TikTok?" And here I am. I'm red in the face in my own house. Like, oh man, like that was quick. It was like less than 2 weeks of me trying to hide from this, and people are already messaging me. But the support was overwhelming. Everyone was like, "Wow, this is
Yeah.
like amazing. I didn't know that you had this talent. I didn't know that you could do this. This is like making me want to do different things and making me want to pursue my hobbies." And it was just like the boost I needed to be like, oh, okay, like it is okay for me to be myself. It is okay for me to like let down this wall of like masculinity and not care if people think I'm soft or not for doing something, or because that's kind of that prison street mentality you get into, is like you don't
Yep.
want people to see your true feelings, because when they do that, you're showing them a weakness. You're showing them, an in that they can try to get over on you. So that was liberating. Like I look back on that, and I look back on that summer, and it was such like a liberating summer, because it was just like me being able to finally allow myself to be me. And so after that, I took off the ground running. I contacted Jesse Heffernan, who does recovery coach certified training through CCAR. He was at Helios at the time, which was a company that he founded, and I was like, hey, like, can I do this training? I'd love to learn more about how I can help through what I'm doing. And alongside that, I got personal training certified and nutrition coach certified, and kind of was just developing like this arsenal of this three-prong attack that I could take for my own recovery and then help others in the process of that. So after I got certified in all of those things, and just to touch on like the recovery coach training, it was amazing. Like I never really realized how biased I was, like in like just my everyday life. And like through like the diversity inclusivity training, I learned how like prison and how like the justice system had shaped kind of how I think, and shaped the language I use, and shaped, different prejudices I didn't know I had. And I was able to kind of break down those walls and break down those barriers. And I think that helped me even more become okay with myself, because I was able to kind of look at these things not as flaws, but just or as flaws, but as flaws that are like changeable, and things that I can like work on, and that things that are going to help people beyond my reach once I get it, kind of set in stone myself. And so after I got certified for all that stuff, the Lifted Poet Society was born. And it originally started out as like a more fitness focused and more like nutrition focused, with a kind of side of poetry and side of literature dabbled in there. So my first couple of clients were, people that were in recovery that were looking to, get a little bit healthier. And I convinced them to let me do it, and let me make them do poetry and make them do literature stuff on the side with it. And what I learned is that through doing this, it's much easier to get people engaged in something when they're expressing themselves. And I don't think that we always realize that, because we don't always realize how easily we can express ourselves. This is expressing ourselves. Us just having like a conversation right here about something, that we both relate with, is us expressing ourselves to each other and
Absolutely.
creating is it's poetry to me. Like this is art within itself. And I think the more that I worked with people and was able to relate art to like fitness and to like mental health, I just saw how much more motivated people get to actually like pursue like their own health, and pursue their own recovery and finding fulfillment in it. So that's how the Lifted Poet Society was born. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. Yeah. I agree with you. The recovery coach training is amazing. I learned a lot about my own thought processes and how, when you're helping people, you have your own ideas, and even in your own journey, like what works. And sometimes we want to like, bottle it up and say, here, just do what
Right.
I did. And for
Exactly.
a lot of people, that's, not effective. Like, I mean, we all have our own journey and we all have to kind of go through it, right? So,
Right.
um, that's awesome. So, you kind of touched on harm reduction. You do some harm reduction now. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, just speaking on harm reduction, I think that is the best method for what we're going through like right now in the current like stages of this, epidemic that we have with drug addiction. Things are crazy out there. The drugs are not like the same that they were like when I was using or like when you were using. And so I think we need to focus more on keeping people alive, number one, because we can't help people get clean if they aren't alive. And I think that's the main focus for me right now is getting involved in like the advocacy work that I'm doing and getting involved in the harm reduction that happens down here. So down here, I just get involved by doing like outreach with putting together
And you're in
Narcan
Arizona
kits.
now.
Yes, yes, Tucson,
Okay,
Arizona.
okay.
Yes, yes,
Just to
absolutely. Yep.
clarify. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so like we do that just by getting out into the community and putting together Narcan kits, putting together safe needle kits, wound access kits, and then we put in resources in there for like surrounding areas because in my opinion, like you were just saying, we can't bottle it up and just give it to everybody. Some people that might work with, but other people kind of need to discover this like on their own. And I think the best way that we can do that is getting them resources with the life-saving materials. So, you have resources, right in the kit with the like an overdose, prevention type kit. And then, you are able to kind of get those resources directly to the addict and they may not look at them that time, but maybe they'll look at it some other time. You know what I mean?
You're
Maybe they'll
planting a seed.
exactly. That's exactly. You're planting a seed and that seed will hopefully blossom into something beautiful eventually.
I saw a statistic, and I don't know it off the top of my head right now, but just about how, like, at a needle exchange, for instance, how many people get service connected from that.
Right.
It's pretty incredible. So to think, a lot people have their ideas about harm reduction, and but I think that when you really look at the data, um, I think that you're right. It's about keeping people alive long enough to find their recovery, right?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so anyway, sorry, I just wanted to say that.
No, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think that like there's still a lot of stigma around harm reduction and it's hard it's hard it's still hard to have conversations with people that aren't willing. I think and this kind of goes into some of the challenges that I was thinking of when I was thinking about like the challenges moving forward, and it's like it's still difficult to have conversations with people that aren't really inclined to hear that kind of change still. And I think it's still important that we have them. I think that's kind of the thing that I'm learning is difficult conversations have to happen in order for them to become easier. And I still work in the service industry part time, so I have a lot of these conversations with people that come to the restaurant and like people that frequent the restaurant a lot. And as time goes on, through my own experience, like being able to share my own experience with them, I've seen in certain people that kind of that switch from like, oh, okay, like it makes sense what you're saying. Because a lot of times I'll be like, well, you and I are like good friends. Like we have like a working relationship. You come in here, we talk, like we enjoy each other's company. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for harm reduction. You know what I mean? Like I was saved by Narcan. I was saved once by my mom with Narcan, and she would have never known about it if it weren't for people pushing for harm reduction services. So it's like we wouldn't even be able to be having this conversation. Like if you look at the grand scheme of things, this is a beautiful conversation, a beautiful like interaction we're having, and it wouldn't have been able to happen unless there were these harm reduction methods in place. And so that's been kind of how I've been kind of trying to change like my language and how I talk to other people about it because when they see I think when you can see kind of success in it, it's much easier to believe in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, it's become a very politicized issue. But I
Absolutely.
think that at the end of the day, everyone wants the same thing, and that's for people to be healthy, people to make it into recovery, people to live happy, fulfilling lives. So when you look at it through that lens, I think that it definitely, I mean, maybe it's easier to grapple with. So well, that's great. I think based on what you're seeing, because you're down in Arizona, um, how is the drug trend down there? I mean, is it
Uh, it's not good. I mean, obviously it's not, I don't think it's
right?
good anywhere. But with the year-round hot weather down here, we have a much higher unhoused people rate. So you see a lot of it on the street, and you see a lot of it just like as you're driving down the road. There's I mean, less. I'd say it has. I feel like it's my personal experiences have decreased over the last years. But when I first moved down here, there was a lot of times that I was stopping on the side of the road and making sure people were okay, making sure that like people didn't need help or like they need, if they need water, if they need anything. The main issue that I see down here is there isn't as much outreach as I'd like to see. With us having such a high rate of unhomed people and of drug addiction and it being so like prevalent on the street, I think that there is a lot more opportunity to kind of get out there, boots on the ground, and connect with people. It's something that I'm trying to work on now that I've been down here and I'm a little more established in the area. There are a couple of really good organizations that do. There's the Church of Safe Injection down here, which is a nonprofit that does outreach. There's also there's a couple. I forget his name. I should have had it ready, but there's this guy on YouTube that just goes around and just helps with what he can, drops off care packages. But I'd like to, and I'm trying to get more involved in like getting boots on the ground because I think that there's too big of a gap down here between resources and like the actual people suffering and struggling on the street and with drug addiction. With us being so close to the border, like obviously there's more access to cheaper drugs, and I think that is always a catalyst for a more abundant drug trade and a more abundant drug crisis. But yeah, I think that's kind of the state of affairs down here. I've been to the East Coast recently and up to Wisconsin and the West Coast recently, and I think we're seeing the same trends and the same problems pretty much everywhere. I think there's just little bits and pieces that are different in each area.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that it's a issue across the country. So I'd love it if you're able to tell us a little bit about your book, or is this your
Oh,
second book?
this is the second book. This is my
Okay.
second collection of poetry. The first one was released last year, last August. If I'm being completely honest about it, I would go back and do about 100,000 things different with it. But we'll step back a second as well. When I first moved down to Arizona, I tore my ACL. I like immediately. I was 2 weeks down here, super happy, getting into the fitness training, helping people as much as I can. And I'm in the mountain. I took a wrong step, and my knee just popped, and I ended up tearing my ACL. So that kind of threw a wrench in like everything. And like I was kind of like I didn't know what to do because I'd spent a lot of money to get down here. I'd invested a lot in my company to kind of get everything going. And now I kind of just felt like I had fallen flat on my face. And that's kind of where the poetry really became like the main focus. Obviously, I was laid up on a couch, so I didn't have much to do besides write. And so I decided I was going to finally like buckle down and learn how to publish books and learn how to do this book of poetry that I had wanted to do because I had all these poems that I had written in rehabs and treatment centers and prisons, DOC houses, everywhere. I had just hundreds of poems written, and so I put them all together in this book, and I self-taught myself how to publish books. And kind of the vision in my head was like, if I can learn how to do this for myself, maybe I can add this to like my repertoire of helping people that are struggling with mental health and addiction to be able to express themselves as well. And the process was long, it was difficult, and but I learned a lot. I like I said, I would do a lot different, but it ended up doing pretty well. I was able to go to a couple events and like speak on it, and a lot of people enjoyed it. But out of that, I was able to get my first partnership with Lifted Poet Society, and that was with LMS Voice out of Washington D.C., where I was a part of their Disrupting the Narrative Challenge, where right after my ACL tour, I also lost my cat. My cat Bravo ended up dying from a very rare cat disease, just kind of very suddenly. And that was just kind of like, he was my best friend. So that was just like another thing on top of everything else, where I was just like, things aren't going great. But out of that, I had my first like real experience with how poetry can heal. And so I wrote a poem about it. I just went to my first open mic down here, and I read this poem and I cried. I just cried with like a bunch of strangers, a bunch of people that I hadn't met. And it was beautiful. Like everyone came up to me afterwards. Like we had lots of talks. I was wearing an LPS shirt. So like I was able to like talk to a lot of people about like what I wanted to do and get more connected. And it also won me a place in that Disrupting the Narrative Challenge. So I got to go out to Mobilize Recovery in Wisconsin, or in Washington D.C. I was able to perform a poem. Macklemore was there. Vice President Harris's husband Doug was there. The second gentleman of the United States. Ryan Hampton was there, author of American Fix. Like all these really like people, all these people that I looked up to were like coming up to me after like my performance and being like, "Wow, like you did amazing. This poem was amazing. Your story's amazing." And it was like the first like consecutive experience where I was like, oh, okay, like this poetry thing can like be a thing. This literature can really help people. Even though like I didn't feel comfortable jumping right into like the personal training stuff, I was like, oh wow, like maybe this was like my sign that I can do exactly what I wanted to do without it being this broader thing, and I can kind of narrow it down into something that I can really focus on. And so that's kind of where it took like a turn. I started like getting into the books. And when I got back, I decided I was going to write the collection I Learned How to Love from Heroin. And that just released this last Saturday. And that's like my baby. Like I love this book. I'm so proud of it. I think that it turned out into everything that I ever could have hoped it was. And it is kind of the story of me. It's the story of my life, from like the trauma I experienced in my childhood into me kind of meeting opiates and meeting heroin, and how it was almost like a relationship throughout my whole life. It was like its own entity, its own like person. And like my life it was like a really toxic relationship with like this drug, this person, heroin. And I kind of just chronicle the events through very non-traditional poems. It's not like your traditional academia style poetry. It's very just kind of raw, just authentic, not based on any like specific form, just kind of exactly how I felt at the time. I put it down on paper. And it was a journey. It was because I had already gone through, some pretty extensive therapy. Um, I was diagnosed with PTSD during that therapy. And so I did like a lot of extensive work to kind of work on that and like unpack everything and heal from it. And so it was kind of like unpacking it from like an emotional standpoint, instead of like therapy was more of that logical standpoint, where I could like kind of pick the mind of my therapist and be like, oh, so this is why I display these symptoms when this situation happens. And this unpacking through the book was all emotion. It was all just like, well, this is what I feel when I think about this, not really what I think, but this is like the emotions that are elicited, that come out of me when I feel this way. And so I spent a lot of time crying. I spent a lot of time laughing. I spent a lot of time kind of going through the ebbs and flows of different emotions. And there were times where I felt manic where I was writing it. You know what I mean? There were times that like I was channeling energy that like I didn't even really know if it was healthy or not. I was like, it would be like 4 in the morning, and my shades would be drawn. I'd be texting like people that were helping me edit the book, and I'd be like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And then I'd notice that it's like 4 a.m. and I'm texting back. I'm like, I'm so sorry. It's 4 a.m. I didn't realize how early it was. But it was such just like emotional and like raw journey. And I'm glad it happened the way it did. Maybe next time I'll work a little bit more on like the self-care during those times where like the shades were always drawn. But I'm really satisfied with how it turned out, and how I feel even more liberated now after it's kind of out there.
Sounds like a typical artist to me. Like, no, that's amazing, man. Your story is just so inspiring, and I'm pretty inspired by you and just what you shared
Thank you.
today. Obviously, we've had a lot of time to talk, and we spent some time at Chippewa together, and a lot of really positive conversations there. But when you reconnect with somebody kind of on the other side, and you see where they're at, and it makes you, um, yeah, it's really nice because, as you know, not everybody gets out of that situation, so
Right.
it's a positive thing. So I kind of want to give you this last opportunity. I'm definitely going to include all your links in the
Yes.
description of the episode. Check him out. He's on TikTok. Are you on YouTube too?
No, I'm about to be though. I have a YouTube
Okay.
channel. I haven't posted on there much, but I'm gonna start posting all like my longer performances on there. You know,
Awesome.
all the slam events that I go to and all like the events I do. So that'll be up. That'll be up by the
Yeah,
time this
talk a
goes
little bit
live.
about the slam event.
Oh
I
yeah,
just saw a
yeah.
video. I didn't even know.
Yeah. So last this is a cool story. So last year when I started right after I got back from Washington D.C. and I was kind of trying to pursue more performance enhancing, but like performance style poetry. Me and my dad were just talking one day, and I saw on Instagram this advertisement for the San Diego Poetry Slam, and I just turned to my dad and I'm like, "Oh, this would be a real starving artist move for us to just drive out there tomorrow because it was like the next day or something. Just drive out there tomorrow and kind of see what happens, and then drive right away back because I had to work the next morning." And he's like, he's retired, so he's like, "Well, do you want to do it?" And I'm like, "Why not? Let's just do it." So we drove 5 hours out to San Diego, and it was an amazing experience. Let me tell you, I've never felt that kind of energy. I've never been around people that were so passionate about poetry. It's put on by Rudy Francisco. He's a very famous modern poet nowadays. So it was the coolest experience, and I did really well. I think I took third that time, and decided that hey, like I am going to keep coming out here because I get better. Like I felt after I left, I'm like, wow, I became a better poet. I became a better person. I met really, really cool people, and I'm like, this is what I want to keep doing. So I just started going out there on a monthly basis. I ended up that first year last year making it to the Slam City final. I believe I took fifth, fifth or sixth at the Slam City final. So we're trying to do better this year. I just took second this last Monday. At the San Diego Poetry Slam, and gave me enough points to get invited back to the San Diego Slam Grand Final next month. So next month I'll be at that. Hopefully do a little better than fifth or sixth this time. But I love it. It has helped me become a better poet by far. And yeah, that's kind of where we've been at with the San Diego Poetry Slam. Yeah.
That's awesome. What advice would you have to someone who's maybe on the fence about pursuing their dreams or pursuing something that they love?
It sounds so corny and cheesy, but take the step. Like really, like do it. I think that was the hardest part for me. This was something that I thought about doing even like in prison. Like even in prison, I had these thoughts of doing something similar to this. I didn't know exactly what it looked like, but it took so much convincing of myself to let myself be the person that I wanted to be. And so I think like the first thing is take the step, whatever that first step is for you. I think that it's important to cross that line, take the risk, and then reach out. I could not have done it without, like my support group. My friend Jesse we call it the Jedi Council. You know what I mean? Like you kind of get these people around you that like you can go to with certain things. So I have like a poet friend of mine, Joseph Green, that like if I need help in something poetry related, I text him and I'm like, hey, can we talk for 20 minutes about, this so I can kind of clear my head a little bit about it. And then I have like Jesse who got me recovery coach training. If I have something peer support related, I send him a message or a phone call and I'm like, hey, like this is, I need help in this area of my life. And then I have, people that are really business savvy, but are still in the recovery world. And I'm like, hey, like I'm trying to translate this into something that will help me reach the message or help the message like reach my intended audience. Like, what can I do? And they'll be able to help me. So my two biggest things or advice is number one, take the risk. And then number two, compile like a small group of people around you that are able to, kind of help guide you when you need it.
Words of wisdom.
Absolutely.
Um, well, Alex, I appreciate everything that you said. I am grateful that we could reconnect, and I know that we're going to stay in contact after this. I want to give you this last opportunity, if there's anything else that you want to share.
Um, just if you're out there and you're watching this and you're involved in advocacy and you're involved in peer support, I know that it can be overwhelming at times. And I've had a lot of conversations over the past couple of weeks with people that have been in this field and gotten burnt out. And I want you to know that from somebody else that's in the field, we all hear you. Like everything, all the work that you're doing, even if it doesn't feel like it's seen or that it's heard, like seriously, if you're impacting one person's life in this field, you are doing like exactly what needs to be done. And I've had a lot of people like reach out over the past couple of weeks with like my book being released and just, tell me how like proud they are of me and tell me how much it like means to me, and I can't tell or means to them that like I'm doing what I do now, and I can't even like express into words how like good it really makes me feel. And so I just want like anybody that's like in the field or watching this that isn't feeling heard or isn't feeling seen to know that like you are 100% heard and seen, and that like this is such important work, and we are in like a time in the world where it might get more difficult to do this work. And I just want everybody to know that like this is a fight worth fighting. And like people that are drug addicts and alcoholics and struggle with mental health are humans worth saving. And just keep up the good fight. That's my closing statement, closing remarks.